Oi, eu sou Marcelo Copello, estou com o Steven Spurrier. É uma honra estar aqui em Londres, na casa dele, para conversar um pouquinho sobre vinho, sobre o mundo do vinho, o prazer e tudo que ele quiser conversar comigo agora. Steven, thank you very much to receive me. It's an honor to talk to you.
Pleasure.
So, to our readers in Brazil,
Okay.
I think it's inevitable to start asking you, how did you start in wine?
I had always wanted to go in the wine trade. That's to say, my choice of career from university, but even before university, was to go into the wine trade, because I became fascinated about wine in my early teens.
And what did you study at university?
Well, I studied history, which is interesting because my grandfather introduced me to wine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got Christmas dinner or something like that, and the first wine I ever drank was when I was probably 13 or 14 years old, and it was a port, because
Mm-hmm.
in English families we had port after dinner, and he asked the butler to pour me a glass of port, and I thought it was wonderful. I said, "What's this, Grandpa?" Coben's 08. Coben's 1908.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, and in those days I collected stamps, as a lot of people like me did, and therefore, to me, the wine had a region, a country, and a date. And I actually began reading about wine when I was at school. Obviously I didn't drink very much of it, but I began getting interested in where wines came from. And then my parents used to take my elder brother and I abroad with them to France and Italy, and I really loved the conviviality of wine. We went to the trattorias and the brasseries, and there was everyone having a glass of wine and having fun. It was so different from England at that time in the 1950s, which was really very boring. And we hadn't yet got into the 1960s, which was anything but boring. And so I then went to university in London, and I joined the University Wine Club, and I tasted a bit and read a bit more, and out of university I decided to go into the wine trade. So that's all I've ever done.
So you started in England or
in England,
in France?
in London.
Then you
in
went
London,
to France.
In London. Yeah, then I went to France. Yeah, and so I began in the English wine trade as a trainee, and then in 1965 I spent 9 months abroad in France, Germany, and Italy, and Spain, and Portugal.
This was the year I was born, 1965.
No, good. Well, not a very good year, but a good year.
Not for wine.
Not for wine, but and then I came back and I joined a small wine company, and then my wife and I got married, and we went to live in France, because I bought a property in the south of France, and so for 2 years I wasn't in the wine trade. I was trying to renovate the property, and then that didn't really go the way we hoped, and so my wife said, "Well, what are we going to do now?" And I said, "Well, we'll go to Paris and I'll get a job." And then in Paris there was no wine trade as we had it in London, and so I bought a wine shop. So it's quite
Paris there was French wine only.
Well, no, but it didn't matter what they were selling, but there was no structured trade in the UK, because we didn't produce wine. We had importers, we had wholesalers, we had retailers, and in Paris you had the huge wholesale arm, which was just Vin d'Honneur, and then you had lots and lots and lots of shops. And so I realized that the only way I could do what I wanted was to buy a shop. So I luckily found a shop which was for sale in the Madeleine, which was the best place to be.
Yes.
And that was just a stroke of luck. I mean, a lot of my life has been luck, I admit that. And I immediately, then, the day I bought the shop, I put an advertisement in the Herald Tribune, which was the English, well, the International Herald Tribune is called now, but was called the Paris Herald Tribune then. And the advertisement read, "Your wine merchant speaks English. Call Steven Spurrier."
Good.
And I got most of the English and American clientele. So that was very good. And then that was in 1971, and then in late 72, early 73, I opened l'Académie du Vin, which was the wine school. And the reason for doing that is that some evenings my principally American clients used to come by, taste a few glasses of wine, and I used to tell them about it. And they said, if ever you could put this on a structured basis, we'd love to do a wine course. And then luckily the premises next door, another bit of luck, to my shop came up, and so I moved in. I bought that and moved into it, created l'Académie du Vin, the first wine school, the first private wine school in France, owned by an Englishman, and I had an American as my partner, and that really was wonderful because I was doing what I wanted, buying and selling wine, but also talking about it and educating it. And then l'Académie du Vin became very well known, the shop was doing well, and then we did the Judgment of Paris.
Oh, the Judgment. We'll have to talk about this, of course.
Yeah.
This changed your life, right? This tasting.
No, not as much as people think, because this was in 1976. I'd already had the shop for 5 years. I'd already had l'Académie du Vin for 4 years. We were doing lots of events. And we did tastings of all the Premier Grand Cru Classé, but this was the first event of its kind when I wanted to achieve recognition for California wines. And the only way I thought I could do that is to have them blind tasted against the best French wines. And I had the best tasters I could find. And because what I was doing was very much respected, all the best tasters, the people I asked, they all turned up. So Aubert de Villaine from the Romilly Conti, Jean-Claude Vignon from Taillevent, Pierre Tarry from Giscourt, wonderful tasters. And I said, this is going to be a blind tasting, and there are California wines here, and there are French wines. Do you mind tasting the wines blind? And they said, no, not at all. Because they thought, well, California, it's sort of... Anyway. And well, what happened. But it didn't change my life immediately because it took some time for the tasting to be written about, and then it grew a life of its own. And so I would say that it has affected my life, it has influenced my life, but it didn't actually change it, because I still stayed selling wine in the Madeleine. It's not it's not as though you're an unknown actor and suddenly you appear in a film.
Okay, you stay in the same business.
I stay in the same business, but what has happened, and that I could not have foretold, is the Judgment of Paris has become an historic event, and it's referred to all the time. And therefore, people can't they can't look at my name without saying Judgment of Paris.
Yes. Do you think this judgment actually changed the wine world? Yes. Or something would happen the same way, or in different ways, maybe.
What happened? It was the first time in history, or first time that unknown wines had been compared to known wines and judged blind by a panel of experts, so that their judgment had to be respected. And people might have, tasted wines together and said, that California wine is jolly good. It's almost as good as Mouton Rothschild, but it had never been done publicly before. And that was the first chink in supremacy of France, because France was totally supreme. People bought Rieslings in Germany, they bought port in Portugal, they bought sherry in Spain, but in terms of wines, France was completely supreme. And that was the first chink in French supremacy. So it did two things. A, it gave a terrific boost to California wine, who'd been making wine for 150 years, 100 years or so, more. But they'd had prohibition, and they were making absolutely wonderful wine. But anyway, the California wine industry needed a boost. It got the boost, and what it did is, after the initial shock, the intelligent people in France said, "Well, I wonder why it happened," and so they went to California to see what was going on, and they saw huge investments in the cellars. Exactly, massive amount of money being, and basically, the French vineyards had always been starved of money, because either they were owned by absentee landlords like the Rothschilds, and there was no investment in the vineyards because they kept on running them like that, and the intelligent people began to invest money in vineyards. And it's no coincidence that the first vintage of Opus One, which was a collaboration between Philippe de Rothschild, Mouton, and Robert Mondavi, their first vintage was 1999. And although Robert Mondavi and Philippe de Rothschild might have thought of doing something, it took the Judgment of Paris to get them together. And so Opus One and then Senya and all these cross-country collaborations are the direct result of the Judgment of Paris. But what it did, it changed the world of wine by opening it up. Before that, it had been closed.
Great, yes, I agree. And looking back in those more than 30 years, what do you see?
Well, I see that the wine consumer has never had it so good, in the sense that today's wines, from every level, from inexpensive everyday wines to the best wines in the world, have never been better. Never, ever, ever been better. And in many things, people hark back to the 20s or 30s, something, and say, "Oh well, things were much better then." This is not true of
yes,
true
I think
about
so.
wine.
I think we drink better wines than Napoleon did.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. And the quality of winemaking, the quality of vineyard management, everything is moving towards better wines, better vineyard management, better equipment in the cellars. And I remember in my shop in Paris, if I was looking to buy a Sancerre or a Puy-Fumé or an Alsatian Riesling or a Côte de Rhône Village, I had to taste, if I had 15 wines to taste, 7 or 8 of them would be barely drinkable, even selling. And then of the half that remained, there would probably be 4 I wouldn't want to sell because I didn't like them, and maybe 3 which I liked enough to sell. So now, if I had 15 Côte de Rhône Village, I would think at least 10 would be wines I would like to drink, and maybe 5 would be not quite so good. But none of them would be as downright bad as half of the wines were back in the 70s.
And on the bad side, and the globalization of wine, the wine being made in the same way, tasting the same way in the lower ranges, what do you think of this?
Well, I don't believe that's true. I don't believe it's true anymore. I think if we were talking 5 years ago, I would agree. I would say that the Australian wines were becoming much more bland. The Chilean wines hadn't yet discovered the individual valleys and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I would say there was very much an accepted, rather over-fruity, higher in alcohol, low acidity side of wines, a kind of blandness overall. That's gone because you can't keep on selling those wines because people get bored with them. And people who don't want to spend too much money are just after a reliable wine to drink. Okay, so those are the people who will have Nescafe, and the people who, like me, who make their tea out of tea bags and all that kind of stuff. Because the tea I have in the morning is merely something to sip while I'm working, and I have the same tea every morning, and it doesn't. Yes. It's
some wine is commodity. We have to admit.
It's commodity. So the commodity wines, that's fine. People just want wine as a commodity, and as long as it tastes nice, that's fine. However, above that basic commodity level, the wines begin competing with each other for the money that the consumer wants to spend. So let's say below £5 in England, and we have £1.80 excise tax, and we have VAT at 20%. Below £5 in England, no one's paying too much attention, or £4.50. Above £6, everyone's paying attention. So people are saying, why should I spend £7 for that wine, whereas I'm quite happy with my £5 wine? So the £7 wine has to be much more interesting. And since there are many wines at £7, the £7 wine there has to compete with the £7 wine there. So the commodity wines don't have to compete with each other except on price, because they're a commodity, so no one is demanding anything from them. Once you move out of the commodity level, you have to compete on price and in terms of quality, and the higher up the price you go, the more you have to compete on quality.
And what about style or habits to age wine? I think we're losing this. And to get another question, do you think if we repeat the judgment from Paris today with the same vintages after 30 years, would change the result?
Well, funnily enough, we did it. We did the Judgment of Paris 30 years on in 2006. We did it
with the same vintages.
Same vintage, with the red wines. We did it simultaneously in Napa Valley and in London. And we did it at 6 p.m. in London and 10 a.m. in Napa Valley. And we had 9 tasters in each country. And we had one of the original tasters from Paris go to Napa, and one of the original tasters in Paris come to London. And we had exactly the same wines. And on my panel, I had Jancis Robinson, Michael Broadbent, Hugh Johnson, Jasper Morris, Michael Schuster. I mean, anyway, we all put Ridge Montebello top. But when the judgments of the two panels were combined, the first 5 wines were from California.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
And the best wine was Mouton Rothschild. The best of French wines was Mouton Rothschild. However, we then, not tasting blind, we then had a tasting of the 2000 vintage from California and from Bordeaux, and I refused to do it blind because I said, no, I'm not going to do another blind tasting. I said, anyway, there were 12 wines, the same 12 wines from California. I mean, 12 wines from California and Bordeaux, and in that tasting, the French wines wiped the floor with California, and the result from that is that in the 1970s...
Okay, so you're saying that you redone the Judgment from Paris with the same wines, same vintages in California and London?
Yeah.
High-level tastings?
Yeah. Well, we did it... it was an extraordinary event because we did it on May the 24th, which was the date in 1976. Simultaneously in Napa, they began to taste at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we began to taste at 6 o'clock in the evening. So we had to taste at the same time. And the results came out. By the time the results came out, we were having dinner. But anyway, we were tracking the results on a big board.
Nice.
And it was extraordinary. I mean, the team that I was tasting with and my judgments weren't taken into account, as they weren't in Paris either. And Patricia Gallagher, who was my partner in the Academy de Vin at the time, had gone to Napa, and her comments weren't taken into account. So we already knew as a team the ranking we'd put, and California was almost identical. And when you join the two rankings together, as I had said, the California Reds took the first 5 places. And that was because people have said over the years, the Bordeaux tasted too early. Well, I did the tasting again in '86, and instead of having the Californians took the first 2 top places. But anyway, it was really a triumph for California at that time. And then we tasted openly, not blind, the 2000 vintage. And this time Bordeaux wines won totally and utterly. So I said it was California was resting on its laurels. California was resting on its laurels in the 2000 vintage, and France had been resting on its laurels in the 1970s. And so the change, a bit of shock does you good.
Good. We met in Rio when we were doing a tasting for Chadwick with Senya and Bordeaux wines, together with some Super Tuscans.
Yeah.
You do a lot of tastings like this. I've heard you made one in Russia, for example.
Well, I mean, I do them when Eduardo Chadwick had the idea of doing this comparative tasting with his Vigneto Chadwick, his Senya, and his Eraseris Don Maximiliano. In Berlin, 2004, he asked me whether I'd be on the panel, and I said, yes, sure. and I hadn't really gathered what it was about. But he was not trying to copy the Judgment of Paris, but what happened inevitably when out of 12 wines, Eduardo's wines took first, second, and fourth place. It became known as the Judgment of Berlin, or the Berlin tasting.
Mm-hmm.
And once he'd done it in Berlin, and it was a fantastic result for him. Once he'd done it in Berlin, then he did it in Amsterdam. He did it straight away. He did it in Santiago in Chile, and very soon he did it. Must have been 2008. He did it in both São Paulo and Rio, and then in all over the place. And I was with him at his last 3 tastings in America, in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. And so he'd held, with those 3, he'd held 13 tastings. And in the top 5 wines, that would have left 13 top 5 wines, 65 wines. The Chilean wines took 33 out of the 65 places in the top 5,
good.
Which is 51%. And I think that was over 7 years, which is quite extraordinary. So, the theory is, which he proved, and he's proved it much more definitely than the Judgment of Paris, which was just 1 tasting, that if you're an unknown wine, one of the ways to get known is to go up against the benchmarks. And then if you're judged equally as good, or sometimes even better than the benchmarks, then you can say, I'm as good as the benchmarks. And that widens the world of wine.
Mm-hmm.
And what Eduardo has done, not only for his own wines, but for Chilean wines in general, is amazing. Because
I think you did recently in Russia, right? Something.
No, we're doing, Eduardo is doing a tasting in Russia at the end of May.
Mm-hmm.
I did a couple of tastings in Russia of California, Cabernets around the world and Chardonnays around the world. But it was based on, because it was me, it was based on the blind tasting concept. And I just done one in Budapest with 12 Cabernet blends around the world, 2 from Hungary, and then one from Russia, one from New Zealand, one from Australia, blah, 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 all over. And the Hungarian wines came 4th and 5th, which is fantastic.
So how many times did you repeat this kind of tasting through your life?
I think it's, I'll only do it if I can control it to a certain extent. I mean, Eduardo Chadwick is in control of the tastings he does, but I like and admire Eduardo tremendously, and I know that that's going to be correct. I won't ever be just a hired hand to do that kind of thing. If I'm going to be asked to do a comparative blind tasting, and people are going to look at the results afterwards, I have to be in control of the tasting.
Okay. Is there anything left to say about the Judgment of Paris?
No, I don't think so, not much, except it seems to have got a life of its own.
Yes. It became a film,
well,
book.
Yeah, the film. Well, the book was good. The film was not really based on. The film was a little.
It was fiction.
It's fiction. Yeah,
Yes,
it's fiction, but it's fun. It's a fun movie. Yeah.
And what are your present and future projects?
Well, I guess most of what I do is to work for Decanter magazine. I consult for Singapore Airlines, which I've been doing for more than 20 years. I created with Michael Broadbent the Christie's Wine Course in 1982, and that's still ongoing. And I have a company in India, the Wine Society of India, which is the first mail order club in India, which I created with a partner, and I was just in India last week. But I would say that I align myself to Decanter more than anything else I do. And next week, you've been tasting at the International Wine Challenge. Decanter World Wine Awards starts next week. We're going to have the Decanter Asia Wine Awards in Hong Kong in September. I mean, anything which is involved tasting and communication, that's what I really like. I mean, I love going to tastings. I love communicating with people. I certainly enjoy being a well-known name and a well-known face, because I didn't expect that, and well, there's Oz Clarke and Jancis Robinson and Michael Broadman and Hugh Johnson, so I'm not alone in that. But I get the impression that people read what I write, they pay attention to what I say, and in a kind of relaxed way. I'm not a pontificator like Robert Parker, who I admire tremendously.
Bless you.
But I don't, I just give my opinion, which is a sort of English opinion. You don't want to shout too much. You just you're a little bit restrained. But I love wine. It's been my entire life, and so to continue living, to continue working in the wine trade and communications, basically in communications, is really wonderful, because to me that keeps on widening the field.
Great to hear this, because I do.
Well, and
you're doing the job, yes.
You're doing the same thing.
Let me. Please, this is a present.
Thank you very much.
Wines of Brazil, your book.
Thank you very much.
I know you like Brazilian wines. You
very much.
Wrote about them sometimes.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And what's your opinion? Do we have a niche in this market, in this crazy and wild world market for wine?
World market, I think so. I mean, I think you are both helped and hindered by having Chile and Argentina. So the help is that we view, and the European markets will view them as South American wines. Okay, so it's an advantage for you to say we're the next South American wine, and you're hindered a bit because Chile and Argentina have really got the market, and Uruguay, who were trying to sell their wines on the UK market even 10, 15 years ago, have never really made an impact. They've never, I don't know why. So I think Brazilian wines will become better known in Europe, but bit by bit. You have to, you've got the big steamroller that is Chile. Yeah, exactly. But I think you will, because restaurants now, particularly in London, are selling many more wines by the glass, and they're selling them in 250 cl carafes and 500 cl carafes. So if you look at a wine list and they're only selling wines by the bottle, and you come across a Brazilian wine, you might not want to buy a whole bottle. But if you see a glass of Brazilian wine on the wine list, you say, let's try it. And that's really...
I went to a shop yesterday, the sampler, and they had
a sampler is brilliant.
Brazilian wine by the glass.
Oh, that's great. Well, the sampler is communication par excellence. They have something like 120 wines opened by the glass, and people go there to try something they never tried before. For X pounds you can have a little taste if you can. That's fine. That's tasting the absolute nec plus ultra. But to me, it's more fun to try a Brazilian wine.
So you're invited to visit Brazil.
Well, thank you
go
very
to
much.
wine region. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.
Muito
abraço a todos e saúde.
Thank you. That's great.